7.5,
Move to read by title only.
I need a second.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, go ahead.
Excuse me. An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville amending provisions of Articles 1 and 2 of Chapter 8 of Title 7 of the Emeryville Municipal Code, known as the Wastewater Collection System Ordinance pertaining to building sewer laterals. Okay, you want the short version or the long version?
Shortest.
Shortest. That's probably
What you
enough
just said was good enough for me. Can we give public comment and move this along?
I'll try and make it short. As the council is aware, this our sanitary sewer system has a long and tortured history, well, let me give you a little bit of background. So the city obviously owns and operates a wastewater collection system, which delivers wastewater that's discharged by businesses and residents of the city to the sewer system owned and operated by East Bay Mud, the Interceptor. Their sewer system Interceptor runs along the east side of I-80, and then it delivers all the wastewater that's discharged by Emeryville and other jurisdictions that are in their system to the main main wastewater treatment plant that's located near the eastern anchorage of the Bay Bridge. That facility was actually put into operation in 1951, and it currently provides primary. Oh, it's me. Currently provides primary and secondary treatment of wastewater before it's discharged to the bay. The problem that during dry season, the system operates just fine. There's plenty of capacity in that facility to handle all the wastewater that's discharged. During wet weather, in the winters, unlike the winters we're having now, but a normal winter, that facility can be overtaxed from groundwater that infiltrates into breaches in the pipes underground, and then also from stormwater that is improperly connected to the system. In the early 80s, there was a lawsuit and a resulting consent decree that Emeryville and the other cities, along with East Bay Mud, were involved with. And as a result of the settlement of that lawsuit, in 1986, the EPA determined that the construction of 3 wet weather facilities, 2 of them are in Oakland. One's called the Oakport Wet Weather Facility. The other one is called the San Antonio Wet Weather Facility. And the third is up in Richmond called the Point Isabel Wet Weather Facility. The EPA determined in 1986 that construction of those wet weather facilities, which only provide primary treatment, so they provide for solid removal and disinfection before any wastewater is then discharged to the bay. It doesn't have the secondary treatment that the main plant does. The EPA determined that construction of those facilities was the best conventional pollution control technology and the best available technology economically achievable for reducing the discharge from the main plant of just wastewater, untreated wastewater. So that was to solve that problem during wet weather. They said, go ahead and construct these 3 wet weather facilities. So as a result, starting in 1987, East Bay Mud, with guidance from EPA and the regional board, they constructed these 3 wet weather facilities at a cost of about $400 million. And of course, those costs were ultimately borne by the ratepayers, including ratepayers from Emeryville. Those three facilities were completed in the 90s, 1990, 94, and 96. And then about 8 years after the last facility was constructed, the EPA changed their mind. And they said, no, those facilities are no longer sufficient. But nevertheless, they allowed East Bay Mud to continue operating those three wet weather facilities into 2009 when their NPDES permit expired and they had a new one. And so their new permit commenced in January 2009, January 14th, and then the next day, January 15th, 2009. The U.S. government and the state of California, on behalf of the Water Control Board, they sued East Bay Mud for violations of the Clean Water Act for discharging wastewater from the three wet weather facilities into the bay. And again, these wet weather facilities were the ones that were constructed with the direction and oversight of EPA and the regional board. So thereafter, East Bay Mud entered into a stipulated order with the EPA and the state to undertake all sorts of various studies and implement various programs, and one of them was the implementation of what we're referring to as the Regional Sewer Lateral Program. And this program requires the property owners to essentially test their sewer lateral, and that's the pipe, the sewer line that runs from the structure of the property to the sewer main maintained by the city out in the street. And the upper lateral, as it's referred to, is that portion of the sewer lateral that is on the private property, and the lower sewer lateral is that portion that's out into the public right-of-way. In Emeryville, the property owner is responsible for both the upper and the lower sewer lateral. So this ordinance requires, this regional sewer lateral ordinance requires the property owner to test and inspect, and if it doesn't pass the inspection, to then replace the sewer lateral based on three triggers. One, if they sell their house. Two, if they seek new water service from East Bay Mud. And three, if they try to secure a building permit from a city to do remodeling, and it costs in excess of $100,000. So that was the main requirement that came out of the stipulated order that East Bay Mud entered into. Soon thereafter, the EPA and the state came knocking on all the city's doors, and so we were likewise sued after they had settled with East Bay Mud. Emeryville, Albany, Alameda, Berkeley, Oakland, Piedmont, and the Steege Sanitary District, we were all collectively sued by the state and the EPA, along with a couple private environmental groups, San Francisco Baykeeper and Our Children's Earth Foundation. And we also entered into a stipulated order and finally entered into that in 2001. As a result of that stipulated order, the council adopted an ordinance 1104 that likewise mirrored the Oakland, the East Bay Mud regional ordinance. Since 2011, we've been involved in pretty extensive negotiations with the EPA and the state, and the private parties, along with our the other wastewater agencies and East Bay Mud, to negotiate a decree, a final consent decree that was finally entered in September 2014. And the purpose of the decree is to essentially identify work measures that will eventually result in the discontinuance of use of the 3 wet weather facilities. And there's a deadline for the time by which we have to implement work and eventually put the use of the wet weather facilities to bed. So as I mentioned, the consent decree was, the final consent decree was entered in September 22nd, 2014. And one of the provisions of the consent decree, and why we're here tonight, requires that we amend the regional sewer lateral program in 2 places. That's required by the consent decree. First, that we have to add a provision to make certain that public entities are covered by the ordinance. Our ordinance already does provide for that, but other jurisdictions did not have that requirement. And then the second provision that's required by the consent decree was to provide just a mechanism for a property owner to obtain what's called a compliance certificate. That means compliance certificates are issued by East Bay Mud, and that certifies that you've actually complied with the requirements of the ordinance. But to add a provision that allows a property owner to voluntarily seek issuance of a compliance certificate. The way the ordinances were currently structured didn't allow for that sort of voluntary mechanism. So likewise, we've amended the ordinance to provide for that. Additionally, as I noted, the ordinance that we adopted back in 2011. We've had good 3+ years now of utilizing it, and staff has identified some other areas that we wanted to use this opportunity to clarify. One is in the area dealing with abandoned sewer laterals, to make it clear that the property owner has a responsibility to make sure that when they disconnect their building, a building sewer lateral from their building that's connected to the main, that they make sure, or make it clear that they're responsible to make sure that that connection to the main is likewise severed and plugged, because the line will still be in the ground underneath, and it can collect groundwater, and it can get into the sewer pipe, or to the sewer main and into the system. So the one thing we wanted to make clear was you have an obligation, if you're going to abandon a sewer lateral, that you plug it at the sewer main. The other areas we wanted to add a few clarifications regarding triggers to the application of the ordinance. And likewise, we wanted to make sure that there's a consistent use of terms throughout the ordinance. There's some definitions, and we went through and had to clean things up, and then where we were using defined terms in the ordinance, we wanted them capitalized so you could identify in the ordinance that you're using a defined term that had a specific meaning. And then also we wanted to clarify the ordinance as to how staff is actually implementing the ordinance with respect to two certain categories of properties. One is property owners that have sort of large sewer systems on their property that are greater than 1,000 feet. And we have 5 parcels in town that fall into this category. There's the Watergate Towers, the Novartis properties, Bay Street. There's did I say Watergate?
Yeah.
Anyway, there's 5 of them, trust me. And 3 of them have already complied, so they've already gone through and worked with Public Works and replaced their entire systems. One of them, so 3 are completed. One of them is nearing completion, and then there's one more that is starting to come forth. We're preparing what's called a corrective action work plan, where they identify the work that needs to be done and then identify a schedule to get that work done. And then also the other special properties are really common interest residential developments. So you have a homeowners association, and so an individual owner can't possibly be responsible to replace the sanitary system if they sell their home. So there's a special treatment of how we deal with those as well. And that is one category of property that I know staff has been working with East Bay Mud recently to really start to reach out to the homeowners association to make sure that they're aware.
Can we stick to the ordinance?
That is part of the ordinance.
Okay.
So those are the areas that we're amending it,
All
is
right.
to clarify the ordinance as to how we're addressing those. So those are the 5 areas. And if you want to ask about questions about specific language, we can get into that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
I'd like to hear from the public on this
Any
issue
public?
of burning importance.
Yes. Anybody wish to talk about our wastewater sewer?
I'd like to talk
laterals?
about it briefly. I just see that it's going to be hard for some of our older properties. And just that we need some mechanism that is not so onerous with timing. We need some kind of way that property owners of older properties especially can chip away at it. And I saw the deadline date of 2017. Is that a drop-dead deadline?
You saw a deadline of 2017, I believe, for the common interest developments to submit a work plan. That's just to submit the work plan.
Okay.
And they then have 5 years after that date to actually complete the work.
Thank you for
Yeah.
telling me that.
But
Move the first reading of the ordinance.
Second. Is there any public comment? Okay. Is there anybody wishes to oppose this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. That takes us